I showed you in the plugin doctor that there's two subpages of dynamics, one for this curve that we just looked at and the other one for the envelope as in attack and release. But I was never really able to use that display to really, line up two different compressors. So I've been playing around with this for weeks now, and I think I'm coming pretty close to a good process. For now, let's look at release analysis. I have my typical setup here. We have the browser with all the plugins we're using. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm putting a Melder oscillator into the first slot, and I set it to the same setting, 1000 hertz here. 1 kilohertz, and also 0 dB sine wave. And the first thing I want to do is record that sine wave into a new channel, similar to how we recorded a pink or white noise tone. And I will record this right now for at least a bar. All right, so we'll have two test compressors. One is our Acon digital compressor that we already know. Now, the final part of this is, of course, always an analyzer here in the analyzer channel. And I'm again using the also brand new gFractor spectrum analyzer / scope. So in one of the other tutorials, I was using the spectrum analyzer, but you can also use the scope. Again, we're going to use left and right. I already selected that here. And we can set the size and also the length and keep that in sync with what's going on here. So I set this exactly to 1 bar. Now you can see that I did the usual connections. I'm ignoring the first tone generator. I'm using track 1, which is now our new tone generator, this audio track right here. And I am sending the signal to compressor 1 and compressor 2 at 0 decibel. And then I'm sending the output from compressor 1 on the left channel to gFractor and the output from compressor 2 on the right channel to gFractor. Now, the next thing I will do is I will draw in an automation curve for the volume of this sine so that it's kind of ramping up. Now, when I'm playing this audio back and it's going from pretty much minus infinity decibels to 0 decibels here, we want this to look a bit more linear. So, of course, volume is logarithmic, right? So you gotta pull this up a bit to maybe around here, something like 3 decibels. All right, so this is a good baseline. So the next thing I'm going to do is switch off the display, at least of the automation mode. Of course, this automation is still working. And I want to kind of hit half a bar from the number 2 to 2.3 and set this down here now to half a bar. And then also I want to kind of move this so that we find a good piece of this, which we can then use for looking at the release. And I'm just going to move it by this tiny step here so we can look better at this first part right there. So now when I'm engaging this compressor here, which is on the green, and I'm really making sure there is gain reduction, you can see what I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial, that it's now pulling down the volume here really crazy, like by at least 10 decibels, potentially even more. And then I'm going to pull this up again, so we're kind of coming out at least at where the base signal is. Of course, you can also even make this a bit bigger. And now here we start to see, when I'm changing the release, this really changes over a long curve here. Okay, so while we're looking at release, measurements, analysis, and again, I tweaked this a bit. So this is at -3. We're here in the last part of that bar. And I've moved over my Acon digital EQ now to the B compressor, compressor 2, and I put in some of those that we analyzed. So let's take a quick look. This is the Fairchild, and I notice already that it's not coming out 1-to-1, but at least the relations are correct. So number 1 is supposed to have 300 milliseconds release. So let's see, release goes from 1 millisecond to 2000, which is 2 seconds. And when I'm analyzing this, I came out at about 75, which is then a quarter of the 300. And the number 2 is supposed to be 800. So here I'm coming out at about, yeah, not quite 200. And the next one is supposed to be, excuse me, 2 whole seconds. So that would be all the way over here. Our case, it's gonna be about, yeah, 500. So it's again about a quarter. Well, let's look at a couple more examples. Let me also point out that I try to set all compressors to have roughly minus 10 decibels gain reduction, or 10 decibels gain reduction, absolutely speaking. And makeup should be, so we're kind of hitting somewhat here this line. So here also I'm trying to just, open the threshold, so we're going roughly to 10. And then I'm adjusting this makeup as appropriate. But here I still want to read this out. So at the release of 0.1 seconds, 100, I'm coming out at about half, which is 50. Then 300, about 75.6, about 150, and 1.2 seconds, about 250. Yeah, so that's not exactly the right fractions, I think. I mean, pretty much all of these we could set the ratio to 4, so that was helpful. I kept the attack at the lowest value possible. All right, so let's see, at 100, coming out at 66 maybe. I'm kind of looking at this corner and this corner. 400, around here, 250. Okay, then 800, about 4 something, 1500, about 800. So it's kind of in the half range here. And then the 1176 is supposed to go from fastest release on the right side, here 7, about 50. Yeah, that's about right. To about 1.1 seconds over there. Okay, 800, so not quite up there. Okay, for the fun of it, I also added the LA2A, go to about 10 here as well. And we're pretty much ending up roughly at the 50, 60 milliseconds that it's supposed to have. Okay, again, we're at least in the right ballpark here. Well, keep in mind, in the end, you have to set attack and release also by listening to the concrete audio, not just cloning, say, a preset for drums. So with the release, you want to make sure that, for example, if it's a beat, that you're releasing before the next beat comes in. So you're done with the compression for one sound, say a kick or a snare. And with attack, it's really, really hard. I couldn't really display it. I mean, look at the range, like releases, as I said, 1 millisecond to 2 seconds, and attack is like a fraction of that. So we're like at 10 microseconds up to 200 milliseconds. And I mean, most of the time, you also do this by listening, and you don't want to be extremely fast for drums, so you have still the transient. And then you might be somewhere between, say, 5 and 15 most of the time, I think, for most instruments, maybe up to 30. Depends a bit. All right, this is Oliver for today. See you next time. Bye.